Let me just get your take on the Ukraine war, because the American people have no idea what actually the Ukraine war is about. They have no idea that there was a coup that the CIA instigated with the help of the Nazis inside Ukraine. They don't know that there were two peace agreements that Ukraine violated, not Russia. And they think that one day Vladimir Putin just woke up and got a bug up his ass and decided to invade Ukraine. And that's his first step into invading the rest of Europe, which it just seems mental, and because it is. And so I wanted this recently came out. Ukraine ambassador Chalyi, who participated in peace talks with Russia in the spring of 2022, because there was a peace agreement. As soon as this war started, there was immediately a peace agreement. And remember, Boris Johnson was flown at the behest of NATO to talk to Zelensky to squash it. Well, here, this ambassador is going to talk about that very thing. Here it is.
I was in that moment in the group of Ukrainian negotiators. We negotiate with Russian delegation practically 2 months, in March and April, the possible peaceful settlement agreement between Ukraine and Russia. And we, as you remember, concluded so-called Istanbul communique. And we were very close in the middle of April, in the end of April, to finalize our war with some peaceful settlement. For some reasons, it was postponed. But to my mind, Putin, this is my personal view, Putin in 1 week after started his aggression in 24 February last year, very quickly understood he did mistake and tried to do everything possible to conclude agreement with Ukraine. And Istanbul communique, it was his personal decision to accept the text of this communique, which totally far away from the initial proposal of Russia, ultimatum proposal of Russia, which they put before the Ukrainian delegation in Minsk. So we managed to find a very real compromise. So Putin really wanted to reach some peaceful settlement with Ukraine. It's very important to remember.
So there it was. That's an ambassador who was part of the negotiations in April of 2022. They had an agreement, a compromise with Putin. He's saying Putin really wanted to have peace. He really wanted to end the war. And of course, that all got squashed. Now, Putin has talked about this, and we've covered this, and it all got squashed because the United States and the UK, meaning NATO, didn't want it. And so they had Boris Johnson go to Ukraine and tell Zelensky, you better not do this. Plus, he also had the Nazis saying, in Ukraine, if you do it, we're going to hang you from a tree, and which they probably would have. So he didn't do it. So he squashed the peace agreement. So again, the aggressors are the United States, NATO. The warmongers is the military-industrial complex. And it's not, they have to make Putin out to be this caricature of a thug, even though meanwhile we're occupying a country right next door called Syria, a third of that country. And which third do you think we're occupying? The part with the oil. So what do you say to this? What have you told your viewers about Ukraine?
Well, I've told them the exact same thing you've said, because it's the truth. If you go back to 9 years ago, the Victoria Nuland got caught on a release tape. She didn't deny it. Yeah. The ambassador to the EU saying, screw the EU, screw what they want. We're going to basically start, a war. And then 7 years ago, a few years after that overthrow and that coup, where they attacked the government, killed all the police, and, burned down buildings and installed their new leader that was, more anti-Russia. They then had a CNN report with Fareed Zakaria where George Soros went on there and bragged that he got $5 billion from the State Department and had done the coup a few years before. And then U.S. troops and advisors began to come into the country and train the Ukrainian death squads, because, the country split between Slavic and kind of Germanic groups, and that was a split in World War II, but it's where Russia was founded 1,000 years ago, and is mainly Slavic. But Europe's been pushing the Russians for hundreds of years, basically back towards the Russian border. And so they began to attack those 99% Russian areas. And Putin kept saying, stop doing it, stop doing it, stop doing it. And he said, if you try to bring them into NATO, I'm going to take Crimea, which he then did a few years later. And he said, I'm going to take the Donbass regions and Donetsk and some of those other areas there on the western border of Russia as a security zone. And so it was a provocation by NATO. I'm not defending Russia. I'm not a Russia file, but I have studied the history of it. And then I knew, that's how I was able to predict in October 2 years ago, plus before the Russians went in February, that there would be a war in that area, that Putin would go in by February if he was going to, because that was the intel I got from people I know in the military whose sons were over there already training Ukrainians, and they knew it was coming. And so when the Russians lied and said, we're not going to invade a few weeks before, and the Reuters reporter confronted the State Department CIA guy and said, you're Alex Jones now, claiming the Russians are going to do a false flag and invade or whatever. But I was saying, no, the Russians are going to go in, and they don't want people to know because NATO's moving weapons up against their border. And if Ukraine joins NATO, they've said they're going to put nuclear weapons there.
Yes.
And so this is a major escalation. People don't know in the Cuban Missile Crisis that Kennedy put medium-range Hercules missiles
in Turkey,
and what was the other missile? The Hawk missiles with nukes in Turkey. And so that's when the Russians then put nukes in Cuba.
That's why they don't take the point about that with Ukraine, because we've provoked it before and thought we should be allowed to do that.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so Russia, Putin's told the truth. By the way, you talk about this ambassador saying that you just mentioned, you just played. Putin at the time said, I only want a security zone and I only want to make you sue for peace. And he was never planning to take the capital. He did that to pin down their forces while he secured those areas. And so he said, I want a peace deal. He gave speeches at the time saying this can end right now, say you're not going to enter NATO, and say you're not going to attack these eastern areas, and I'll completely pull out. But he said, if you don't pull out, I will take as much of Ukraine as we have to secure our border. Because remember, 90% of the Russians live in Western Russia. And Putin said, we don't need more land. We're the biggest country in the world. We have more resources than even Africa. It's like 3 USAs can fit into Russia. He said, we don't want to expand. We want to stabilize. We want a peace economy. He cut defense spending until this war started for the last decade. So he's not in an offensive position. The globalists controlling America are in an offensive position, and it has to end. Now they're going to conscript women. Now, the former head of U.S. forces in Europe last week just called for them to conscript women. Zelensky's calling up 500,000 people, and they know they've already lost. So it's purely a political diversion and a money laundering operation, and it is pure war profiteering at its most sick and most evil.
It's just amazing to me how well the propaganda works. We learn nothing from the Iraq War. I mean, as a general people, we learn nothing from the Iraq War. We learn nothing from 20 years of lies and the Afghanistan paper that showed that Afghan was a 20-year lie. That we did learn nothing from Libya turning the most successful country in Africa and turning into a failed state with open slave markets. We learned nothing from Vietnam. We learned nothing from Syria and the lies about gas attacks. We learned nothing from Yemen. Nothing. We've learned nothing. And they could just pull off this Ukraine, and then you get these Rachel Maddows and Sean Hannity's and Anderson Coopers to go on and just lie about the war. And you know they're lying because I know the truth. And who am I? I'm a comedian. And so I know the truth about it. I know they have to know about it because they have $1 million staffs. I don't have that.
And now they're not just picking fights with third world Muslim countries, right, so they can just pump trillions in, like Afghanistan, and steal it. No, ladies and gentlemen, and I know the Afghans aren't Arab, but I'm talking about the Arabs, Middle East, and also the Pashtuns and the Afghans over there in Central Asia. Now they're picking fights with the largest nuclear power in the world that lost a third of its population fighting Hitler. So just like Napoleon went to destroy his empire, the American empire is going back to Russia to die. I love America. I'm a loyal American. Putin isn't censoring me. Putin isn't stealing elections. Putin isn't taking my political front-runner candidates off the ballot. Putin isn't dissolving my borders and telling people come up here for free stuff. Putin isn't shipping in fentanyl to kill 100,000 people a year. He's not doing any of that. And it's all our hijacked, crazy, out of control government that's run out of people to start fights with. So now they're starting fights with the biggest nuclear power in the world. Somebody needs to take the keys away from these maniacs.
Come see us do a live stand-up show. We'll be in Venice, California, Palmdale, California, Omaha, Des Moines, Milwaukee, Lansing, Bend, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Boston, Massachusetts, and we're going to Europe. Do you live in Europe? We're going to be there. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.